President Cyril Ramaphosa addressing the nation on what his office earlier called developments in South Africa's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, we're going to get reactions to that speech. Lots of things were said there. The president saying we're entering a new phase in our management of the pandemic. It's not over yet, but due to the changing nature of the disease, we are going to now adjust our lives so that business can get back to, well, as close as possible to normality, but also our lives, our ordinary lives. Those of us who want to go and watch concerts, who want to go and watch sports activities and so on. But even if you are simply, walking, or exercising, your life has to go back to normality as much as possible. It's the end of the disaster management exercise as we have come to know it over the past 2 years, but the president warns it's not over just yet. In other words, COVID hasn't ended. So, but what we have to do is to learn to live with the virus. Many restrictions have been relaxed so that those social and cultural activities can actually resume. He said, with sports bodies, cultural organizations, traditional leaders, mayors, premiers, and so on. And out of those conversations that the government has had with those leaders of the various spheres of our government, then came what he has just announced. Gathering, indoor, outdoor, up to 50% of capacity. However, there are some regulations or that would have to be met there. Let's bring in now those reactions from the various stakeholders, starting with political parties. A little later on, we'll also be bringing in, as you would have heard from the president, there, tourism, a big factor in deciding what the National Command Council and the cabinet decided today. So we'll be bringing you a reaction from tourism players as well. For now, though, let's talk to the political players, many of whom have actually been calling for what some of the things that the president has just announced, starting with the Democratic Alliance's Vuyo Mvoko. Vuyo, evening. Thanks very much for your time. Your reaction.
Good evening, Vuyo, and good evening to your viewers. Of course, we welcome some of the announcements which were made by the president tonight. We welcome the scrapping of some of the requirements for international travelers. We've long called, in particularly, for easing of red tape as it pertains to tourism, because we're of the view that we want to make sure that tourists start visiting South Africa again in order for us to start retaining jobs as opposed to losing them. We also welcome the scrapping of or at least the enlargement of outdoor gatherings, because of course again this is something that will go a long way in terms of ensuring that we retain jobs. There are a number of things that we are concerned about. We are concerned about the vagueness of the commitment to end the state of disaster. You will realize and you will remember that we have recently undertaken to take government to court because we were always of the view that the country cannot be governed under a state of disaster, and that whatever regulations government seeks to have need to either be incorporated in existing legislation. We hear the president saying that this will be reviewed after public comments on the 15th or the 16th of April. And so we are concerned about that because there seems to not be any around ending the state of disaster.
What do you think he could have said more of, and perhaps little, as well as things he should have said little of?
Look, I mean, as I said, I mean, one of the things that we were particularly looking out for as a political party is the announcement of the immediate lifting of the state of disaster, or at the very least, the commitment to do so by next month. Because we have said that we've taken government, we are intending on getting this reviewed, and we are also we have taken the entire sort of the Disaster Management Act under review based on some of our issues that we have with its constitutionality. So we're deeply disturbed about the fact that there seems to be vague commitment when that will be lifted. But of course, there are positive steps. We think that there should not be any adjuster level 1, and that we should move on into making sure, Vuyo, that we start recovering. South Africa is in a state of peril. If you look at the unemployment numbers, we need to literally jumpstart and kickstart the economy, and we need to start our recovery process. And so we can't have a situation where there is a sort of a slowness in understanding the crisis.
In our country. There are still a number of things.
Okay, we're going to take a quick ad break. After this short ad break, we're going to review more reactions from political parties as well as tourism players who have been calling for some of the things that the president announced today, to check whether they are happy about what was said this evening and what it means for their sector. All that coming up in a short while. Don't go away. Welcome back. We bring you reactions to the president's speech this evening. And coming up on the line, we have someone who represents an organization that has direct interest in the things that were said today, and that's the Tourism Business Council. And we have its CEO, Chifiwa Chibengwa. Chifiwa, good evening. Thanks very much for your time, your reaction.
Well, thank you for having me. Good evening to you and to your listeners and viewers. I do think that what the president have announced this evening goes a long way in reopening the inbound international tourism. We have been saying over the past few months that we have to do away with PCR testing requirement for fully vaccinated travelers. We have been talking about the issues around events in terms of increasing the numbers, and the 50% is a step in the right direction. And the fact that, the social distancing has been reduced to 1 meter is quite significant, because it means that our conferencing can take a bit more capacity, of course, following the protocols that we've put in place. So this is good. So we are moving to the right direction. The fact that the PCR has been removed for fully vaccinated traveler goes a long way. We're going to start to see our forward book looking, better than what it looked like. So it's a better time for tourism. It's better for us to start to plan, for those that want to come into the country. And we've seen many other countries in the African continent removing the PCR requirements for fully vaccinated travelers. So for us, we believe that we have moved into the right direction. We can now, prepare for winter. We can prepare for upcoming summer, and we can do that with confidence. So it's good news that the president have said that those that are fully vaccinated should be able to come in without the requirement of PCR.
Well, much as, you're acknowledging and welcoming a lot of the things that he said, you do seem to still be harboring some reservations, or am I misreading you?
Well, we still have to be careful. We still are living with COVID, and it's a reality, and we still have to make sure that we protect our industry. As much as we have many of the regulations that are going to be relaxed, we need to look at the regulations that the health department have put together very closely, because regulations tend to have these unintended consequences. And it's not easy to remove something once you've put it in regulation. And also, how are we going to police it? So it's something that we're going to be participating in very carefully to make sure that the regulations are progressive and they provide a platform for the industry to progress. But for now, we are happy that the president have done that in terms of the announcement on many things. We wait for the regulations to be amended. And we do believe once the regulations are amended, we can communicate to the whole world that South Africa indeed is open for international inbound business, and it's easy to travel to South Africa, of course, with the protocols that we've put in place. So it's a better day for tourism. And I think that this will go a long way in unlocking the international markets, which was the last market that we needed to be opened. So what the president have done, we thank him for that. We thank the NCCC and the colleagues that we've worked together, the department, the DG, and many other colleagues that we've worked tirelessly to make sure that we arrive at this stage. And I think that it's a better day. We're progressing, we're moving forward. Sporting events are opening. It means that those that follow sports can support tourism, because sports tourism is big. And many people move across the country following their teams. We want them to stay at our establishments. We are ready to welcome them. And it's a better day for us. And I'm hoping that we'll continue in this way in reviving our tourism industry and making sure that entrepreneurs, both in the formal and informal side of tourism, are protected going forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, a better day for tourism, you say, but I mean, countries like your United Kingdom and Australia had already started moving in this direction. Have we seen them, sort of going back to normality in the time that they have been able to remove a lot of these restrictions? In other words, have we seen a corresponding response from tourists in those countries?
No, absolutely. We have seen that. Look, we've seen that with our neighbors in Botswana, our colleagues in Kenya. They have moved faster in terms of removing the PCR requirements for fully vaccinated travelers. And they've seen a surge, in terms of interest, from various source markets. We are, coming in this a little bit late, I would say about a week or so late. Should have done this then, but we are where we are today. So we have seen that others have done many things, and they are moving, progressively forward. And also other countries, that have removed all these requirements, like the UK, people are going to stadiums, they're enjoying the games, and we will have cases. It's how we treat them. We have understood the disease more now, and it simply means that we know how to treat it, we can live with it, and we need to manage it going forward, and we don't need to put regulations that will stifle the economic growth. So, we have learned from other countries, the president have said, but, more so our neighboring countries have done so. And I am sure that other countries within the region, because tourism doesn't only come to South Africa, it also touches the SADC region. I'm hoping that they also remove the requirements so that we can have uniform rules, so that those that want to travel across the SADC region can be able to travel freely without doing too many tests. So I do think that, we've got to learn from other countries that have gone through this, and we are seeing that we're getting there, although at a little bit of a slower pace, but at least today is a better day in terms of how we're moving with this pandemic as far as tourism is concerned.
Okay, let's thank you there for your time this evening, Chifiwa Chivyangwa, who is the CEO of the South African Tourism Business Council. Let's go to someone now who has been campaigning vigorously, especially over the past few weeks, for those sports and cultural events to be reopened. And that is the UDM President, General Bantu Olomisa. Good evening, General. Thanks very much for your time.
Good evening, Vuyo. Good evening to the viewers and also to the president if he's listening.
Only last week we spoke about this after the meeting you convened of opposition parties, where you are complaining bitterly about why the things he has said this evening weren't said much earlier. Your response to what the president had to say this evening?
Well, we have taken note of the government's tactical withdrawal from their old position of being rigid and not listening to the people. We had to threaten to go to court in order for this government to move forward. In any event, we welcome the adjustments, and we are looking forward to reading the regulations in the gazettes from tomorrow. In fact, Had we vaccinated the population of this country, as we called it for last year as early as June, we would be in a better position now. But be that as it may, we think that the institutions in tourism, sport, arts and culture, and many other areas need to recapture the lost ground, and also to make sure that they participate, or rather they comply with these adjusted regulations, especially thanks for removing the mask. You'll recall that I also said the mask must fall. At least people can breathe fresh air in the streets.
When you say it's a tactical withdrawal on the part of the government, are you saying that only on the basis of you and others threatening to go to court, or are there other things or reasons why you think it's a, as you call it, tactical withdrawal on the part of the government?
It's a tactical withdrawal from their position where they were not listening. And when we threatened to go to court, I think they felt that they will have an egg on their face, because what they were doing was not acceptable.
What more, in your view, could the president have done or said this evening?
If I were in his boots, I would have said, I'm lifting these regulations and say, if the pandemic worsens again, I'll bring back these stringent regulations. For now, people are free. We would be celebrating today.
And on vaccination, which you mentioned, what, in your view, are the reasons a lot of people are still hesitant or haven't gone to vaccinate as much as we would have wanted them to?
Unfortunately for South Africa, there were a lot of negativity around the vaccination. I'm sure you, as you are monitoring the social media. So the social media, the activists from all over the world were discouraging people. And there were people also in the country who were openly saying, let us not vaccinate. So the choice now is with an individual. It's either you gamble with your life or you take a precautionary measures. Unfortunately, we can't hold the whole country at ransom by people who are defying these calls for vaccination. Life must go on. That's why I say, if I was a president, I would have said, this nonsense is being lifted with immediate effect. If the pandemic is coming back, would come back on the advice of the scientists and doctors, we will bring it back. There is no need for regulations for that. It's the act which is there in our laws.
Even when, as the president said, it's not over yet. The end of the disaster of the national disaster does not necessarily mean the end of COVID.
Well, in this country, we don't have a disaster in the first instance. Go to hospitals compared to other countries which are still having problems. But the life is back to normality there.
Okay. General Olumisa, let's thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you.
He is the leader of the United Democratic Movement, and he has been a campaigner over the past couple of months of some of the things that the president announced this evening. Let's go to the economic freedom fighters now, and we do have Senao, who's the national spokesperson of the economic freedom fighters. Good evening, Senao. Thanks very much for your time. Your response to what the president had to say this evening?
Look, as the EFF, we simply see that Cyril Ramaphosa is attempting to make COVID-19 regulations a permanent feature of South African legislation without going through the due process of presenting such to Parliament. So it's an objective fact that there's no longer been a scientific or rational application in relation to the COVID of how the president of the country moment in time, and it's never been tied to the influx or decrease of cases or mortalities in terms of the coronavirus. There's simply an uncontrollable attachment to the power that has come in terms of not being held accountable during the COVID-19 pandemic. And Cyril Ramaphosa seems to be struggling to let go of the powers that come with the state of disaster in the country. So he's going to need to start accustoming himself with the fact that the COVID-19 pandemic has subsided in terms of its impact in society. As such, regulations must also decrease. So this 50% in terms of venues and regulation of 200 people at funerals is just ridiculous, but it's a him clutching on to the remaining remnants of power that came with the amount of death and tragedy that COVID-19 brought into society. And he must familiarize himself with the fact that no one no longer takes his voice and his authority seriously, because generally society has disregarded COVID-19 regulations for a long time now. So he's the only one who seems to have a perception of himself as having power. The only power he has been able to have is to continue to stifle the economic trajectory and strength of the sporting, traditional and creative sector. Outside of that, people are no longer listening to what he has to say because they've become to realize that it's not rational and it's not based on medicine.
What makes you think, though, that he would have wanted the state of disaster and the regulations accompanying it a permanent feature? What does he stand to gain from that? So
the state of disaster has given a level of unbridled power to government to implement laws at an ad hoc level under the pretense that it's for our own safety and our own well-being. But what we've come to realize is that sometimes these laws and regulations have been aligned to expediting corruption in terms of procurement at the level of hospitals. For example, we saw in Gauteng PPE procurement. So the emergency procurement procedures were utilized for corrupt activities. We've seen most recently with the over-reluctance to reopen stadia that the only logical conclusion we must reach is that this is to the benefit of broadcasting giant multi-choice, because the continued closure of stadiums will drive people to its super sport entities to be able to engage in sports. So the profit margins there have undoubtedly increased. So our suspicion now, the permanent featurizing of state regulations in sectors of society is a measure of power that Cyril Ramaphosa is unable to let go of, which is why now they want to make them introduce them and integrate them into component laws such as under the health department, in order to ensure that at any point in time they can unduly intervene in our lives and regulate us without making due consideration to scientific and rational basis in terms of that. So even the ambiguity and the vagueness with which now this end of the state of disaster is announced tells us and shows us that this government has become so complicit and so happy by the fact that it can limit gatherings and control the political space as much as it has tried to, by limiting gatherings and limiting people who can attempt to protest and things of that nature. So what Cyril Ramaphosa is struggling to do now. He's struggling to let go of the powers that came with the death that inflicted upon South African society, and that's the impression that we're getting.
Oh, well, I won't get into a long conversation in the interest of time with some of the players you've mentioned, and that you think it's to whose benefit keeping these regulations on and maintaining the state of disaster. But on the question of him and the president, that is, and the country's economic trajectory, do you not think that it would have been in his interest, in any case, to open up the economy anyway, because no president would want an economy to, collapse under his watch?
Ramaphosa has a deeply vested interest, contrary to popular belief, in the collapse of the South African economy. Because if you remember from his own State of the Nation address, he attempted to present a feeble and stupid argument that the private sector is the one that has the responsibility to create jobs and grow our economy, and government must simply be a facilitator of that. So the deliberate collapse of the state-owned enterprises in South Africa, the deliberate collapse of our economy, serves this interest, it serves this agenda, because it will be able to allow Ramaphosa to present the private sector as an intervening hero in the social and economic woes of South Africa, because we have categorized him as someone who is not in control of his own affairs. He's a puppet and is handled by economic interests which are based in Stellenbosch and are based in Washington, which of course craft and direct economic policy in South Africa in terms of neoliberalization and opening a trade relations into a skewed level where South Africa remains an extractive economy that does not have the capacity to industrialize or manufacture basic things such as toothbrushes and washing dryers. So the collapse of the economy of South Africa is part and parcel of Cyril Ramaphosa's agenda as a president, so that he can turn South Africa into a PCY limited in which we lack sovereignty and lack our own political independence.
Snaw Tambo, thank you very much for your time this evening. He is the national spokesperson of the Economic Freedom Fighters, reacting there to the president's pronouncements this evening, a little earlier, on relaxations to a whole range of national disaster regulation, but of course underscoring the point that it does not mean the end of COVID. We're just learning to live with the virus. Well, let's move on now. Let's go to the Inkatha Freedom Party's national spokesperson, and that is Mkhuleko Hlengwa, a member of Parliament. Mr. Hlengwa, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. Your party's response to what the president had to say this evening?
Vuyo, good evening to you and the viewers. Well, obviously, we are at the tail end of the national disaster and the lockdown, and we're in a transitional period now where the greatest responsibility will yet again fall on us, the citizens, to manage our own livelihoods and our own realities. Quite clearly, the president, of course, is buying time with the regulations due date being on the 16th of April, because there will be no other legal framework in place to trigger any regulations in the event that there is an uptick or a surge or a new wave for moving forward. So, of course, we welcome the fact that, steps are now being taken to take the country out of the state of disaster. We fundamentally believe that the country has turned the corner and that we now need to focus on the greatest responsibility of growing the economy, creating jobs, and taking people out of poverty and the suffering which they have actually had to endure over the past 2 years because of COVID. Quite clearly, though, there are a number of numerous lessons that actually have to be learned out of this state of disaster, and chief amongst them is the fact that the Disaster Management Act leaves the executive to its own devices without any checks and balances insofar as the regulations that they make when managing any disaster. And the fact that the checks and balances have excluded Parliament, amongst others, is a problem, and that the courts themselves have been very reluctant to enter into this terrain when approached on matters is the clearest indication to date that the Disaster Management Act is dangerous if it becomes a runaway train, in that it becomes the sole preserve of the executive, which of course would be very inconsistent with the democratic order and constitutional order of the country. So there is work that Parliament will have to do insofar as changing this law to make it compatible with our constitutional dispensation. Beyond that, of course, has been the fact that corruption has become the mainstay of COVID-19 in South Africa, and that during time of disaster, people have just lacked conscience, and we have seen grand looting. This, of course, tells us again that National Treasury will have to tighten its own internal controls of financial management, with, of course, the work that Parliament also has to do to safeguard the public purse when there is a relaxation of the normal due processes to allow for emergency procurement, amongst others. So whilst we, of course, welcome the fact that we have turned the corner, we are saying there are lessons, and we remain skeptical, though, as the IFP, as to whether substantial strides have been made in the country to beef up the health capabilities and health protocols and health infrastructure, because you will recall, Vuyo, that when the lockdown was announced in 2020, the president said time was needed in order to ensure that our healthcare capabilities would meet the demands and the strain which would be exerted on it by the pandemic. Clearly that hasn't happened as things stand right now. And so whilst these regulations, of course, have to be eased out, we remain fundamentally concerned as to whether that was achieved, because if it hasn't, it would fundamentally mean the lockdown was in vain.
Very, very briefly, Mr. Hlengwa, I mean, what are those lessons that you say have definitely been learnt, through this experience? And what have you, as opposition parties in particular, what are your take-homes from the past 2 years?
Well, the take-home is that the constitutional order of the country found itself sort of altered, inconsistent with the democratic checks and balances which the Constitution guarantees. And Parliament found itself standing on the sidelines and watching the executive, literally for all intents and purposes, running the country without any accountability. And that is dangerous. Where there have been interventions and where opposition parties such as ourselves have actually been probing, we have been limited in that regard. I think there is a serious need for Parliament to reflect on its own role in this whole, saga. To say, has it been effective, has it been efficient? And quite clearly the answer will come out as no. And so what it means is, what do we need to do right? But at the heart of it is that there have to be urgent amendments to the Disaster Management Act in order to allow for checks and balances, for oversight and for accountability to be entrenched, so that the executive does not take decisions at its own devices. You'll recall, Vuyo, that at the outset of the pandemic, the president was quite religious in his consultations of opposition parties. But over time, that stopped, and this became less a national matter and more a partisan matter. And that, of course, was not in the collective interest of the fight against COVID-19. So there is also a lesson to say that we do and we must work together. We have to work together as a country when these challenges arise. But we are calling on South Africans during this time, as we now are in a transitional period, to continue exercising safety protocols. The COVID-19 is not over. It remains very much a reality of our lives, albeit, of course, that we now know how to manage it, and that vaccination is one of the major tools which are assisting. But the vaccination on its own requires, people to do the extra work which comes with protection. So there is still a personal responsibility and a societal responsibility on all of our parts to make sure that we observe protocols which are going to push back on this. But it's not over. What is over is literally the lockdown. It's the state of disaster. But the fundamental reality of COVID-19 exists even if you look around the world. And so the disciplines have to remain in place as we fight this virus.
That's why we're going to end it with you. Thank you very much for your time. Khuleko Hlengo, who's the national spokesperson of the Inkatha Freedom Party. Let's move on now to the Dennis Bloem, who is the national spokesperson as well of the Congress of the People. Mr. Bloem, good evening. Thanks very much for your time, your reaction.
Good evening, Vuyo, and good evening to the viewers. Now, Vuyo, we want to reiterate our stand when it comes to the president. The president is no more consulting opposition parties when it comes to decisions on this deadly virus called COVID-19. And it makes a mockery of this thing. The president has turned us now into spectators, and we are lawmakers. It can't be that the president just address the nation, and we must also just hear what the president is saying. But nevertheless, we noted and we welcome the adjustment that the president have announced today. But this issue of 50% of spectators that must go into a venue, I am here talking about sports. It is, and the condition is that they must first be vaccinated. Otherwise, they cannot. That will be their permit to go into the stadium. I can tell you, we reject that thing, because now it is a gun against the heads of people to force them to go and vaccinate. It is not proper that people must be forced. I have said the COPE stand is that please go and consult, listen to the problems of people. It's not that people don't want to be to get vaccinated, but they are having a serious concerns. So that's why we are saying we reject that thing. Open the stadiums, let the people go in and enjoy themselves. Festivals, our artists are struggling, our artists are hungry, people don't get income. Now there's a new condition that no, before you come in, you must show a permit and a certificate for entering this thing. It is totally not right.
Okay. I mean, very quickly, we have run out of time, Mr. Bloem. Is there anything outside of the vaccination issue and what you've just mentioned, at the end of your input just now? Outside of the vaccination issue, is there anything else that you would have wanted him to say or talk about if he hadn't, as you put it, turned you into spectators?
But Vuyo, when this thing started, the president have called all political parties to gather brains, gather advice, share ideas. Now, if the president have called again the opposition parties, you must know that where people are sitting around the table, many heads can bring solutions to the problems. This problem is not the problem of this government alone. It can never solve this problem. It is a problem of the whole country, and all of us must contribute and help to get solutions to this problem. But now, if President Ramaphosa and his government want to make it their problem, it's wrong that they just come and tell us this is what they have decided.
Okay, thank you very much, sir, for your time and input this evening. Dennis Bloom, who is the national spokesperson of the Congress of Our People. Of course, our sister program, The Globe, which is coming up next, will bring you more reactions to that speech by President Cyril Ramaphosa this evening. But from the Watchdog team, it's a good night. To enjoy your evening till we meet again tomorrow at 8 p.m. sharp.